Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Accession ESM Everything Service Management podcast. I'm Daniel Gilby, joined as always by my co-host, Sunil.
Good morning.
And we've got a great guest with us today, and we're looking to answer a fundamental question of service management, which is, are you really serious about service management if you're not sponsoring a Formula One team? John Noctor, great to have you with us. John, if you'd perhaps just give a short intro for our listeners, that'd be great.
Hi guys, yeah, great to be here and really looking forward to this subject. Yes, I'm John Noctor. I'm the Chief Customer Success Officer at the Service Desk Institute. I keep my role description very simple. My role is to make our customers brilliant, whether that be through training, ITSM consultancy, tool selection, or even taking them through our Service Desk certification program.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Great to have you with us. Sunil, you've got a brilliant bit of setup question here to get the conversation rolling, right? So I'm going to pass the proverbial mic to yourself.
Thank you, Dan, and great to have you with us, John. So looking forward to this one. As a bit of background, I think obviously Dan set this up nicely by suggesting that there has been a recent trend of service management of software vendors sponsoring Formula One teams. So we have Atlassian sponsoring Williams, we have Aston Martin being sponsored by ServiceNow, and McLaren have had a history with Halo and more recently with Freshworks. But I guess what we wanted to really try and understand was, so what sort of value do both the racing teams or other high-profile companies that get sponsored by the service management vendors, what kind of value do they get, but also what sort of value are the service management vendors getting? And we have a bit of a history, actually, the preamble that comes before the more recent drive into Formula One. BMC sponsored some years ago, or had an advertising campaign, I should say, actually, some years ago with Simone Biles, a very famous American gymnast. That was called the A Game. And then there are other sponsorship or advertising areas as well. We have Idris Elba with ServiceNow, and then Salesforce have got their sort of double act of Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, haven't they? You know, the kind of, you know, sitting in the rain, eating your meal on a Italian piazza or whatever it was. So, you know, we've seen more of this happening. So, John, first question really, why do you think organizations are choosing to advertise, to brand in this way? What's kind of driving it?
Well, I think, as always with these things, there's probably a number of factors, but I think we need to look at our industry in service management. We've lived through digital transformation and digital enablement now. And if you think of that alignment with a sporting industry, there's no better alignment than there would be with Formula One. If we look at what is Formula One, it's a frontline, world-renowned, well-established sport. But not only that, it's a sport that relies on many of the things that we see in ITSM. It's precision, of course, it's tooling, innovation, teamwork, understanding there's the team at the track, but also there's a bigger team back at base. And we could put that analogy into any IT department, IT service management department. You may sort of argue that the service desk is the pit wall and we've got the crew there dealing with major incidents if they happen. So I think in terms of that, what makes sense to be associated with Formula One is almost the best sporting industry. And I think that's why that we're seeing these organizations want to have their name associated with them, because when we think of Formula One, we think of technology and advancement, but we think of every sport is like this, but I'd struggle to think of a sport that uses data more agilely, if that's a word, and at a depth than Formula One.
Yeah, I think Formula One absolutely sort of sits at that kind of pinnacle, as you said, of technology, innovation, and human endeavor and capability, doesn't it? It sort of brings those things together. I wonder, whether, so historically in Formula One, you've seen, or you still see, you still see AWS, for example, or Google, and they are supporting Formula One teams with a lot of cloud-based data management, processing capability, etc. And I think they see that as an R&D opportunity in and of itself. Do you think the service management vendors get a similar level of return from that innovative environment, or do you think it's more about the association?
I think that's another interesting question. We've always seen Formula One as we see the technology there that eventually filters down into our daily drivers, the flappy paddle gearbox that nobody ever uses on an actual car, but it's there now, and other things. I believe it's more about the association, the image, than it is being able to access early adopters of technology you see in Formula One. Now, we don't know the nature of the contract and relationships, but I imagine that nobody on earth, no matter what their sponsorship, is getting into the R&D of McLaren and Ferrari and seeing what they're developing for next year. But that association builds trust, it builds confidence, it opens doors. And I think that's what's really important, that we're starting to also see service management vendors try to move away from being seen as ticketing systems.
Yeah.
And I think if you're sponsoring a Formula One team, a Formula One car, whatever part, it's because you want to be recognized as a business enabler, not just a service desk and IT enabler.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and it's it's sort of like a proof, in a way, of an ability to add value in quite an extreme environment, isn't it? It's you would imagine Formula One teams don't carry any prisoners, right? If you're not adding value, then you're not part of the setup, I would guess.
Yeah, I think so, and it's an interesting thought that. I think that the reason that we have these, you talked about Idris Elba, Simone Biles, real, especially someone like Simone, in terms of her image and what she's been through, and that prevailing, I think everybody would understand that journey now. It's very well documented, and of course, with these people, that automatically builds a level of almost unconscious trust. We talk about unconscious bias. I think there's unconscious trust when you see a film star such as Idris Elba, someone who's not, as far as I'm aware, involved in any scandal. He's comes across as a really sort of great person. Simone, others as well. If we see people that are part of our everyday lives suddenly associated with companies that are part of our professional world, I think somewhere in our psyche is a link of trust and confidence, and that's the reason. I think about Idris Elba. I don't know the man. I like him as a person and an actor. I'm not sure he'll ever have logged a service desk ticket in his whole life, but the fact he's walking through an office talking about ServiceNow says to me, "Ooh, there's a bit of validation for how good these guys are." And I think at some level there's that trust factor and confidence and belief.
I think there's a level of credibility that they're buying into, aren't they, as well? They're looking at the reputation, as you just said, John, and we're certainly not aware of any scandal or anything similar to that. So, but just on that point, it's interesting to see in the marketing in general, not specifically around service management, is that there'll be these high profile, A-listers, whatever they might be, sportsmen, actors, sportswomen, sports people, and the like. And the moment there's a sniff of a scandal or there's some bad press, those sponsorships and everything else get dropped like hot potatoes, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that through the last, probably I think we see it more now in the internet age, probably showing my age a bit, talking about the internet age, but I predate the internet working. Now, They used to talk about Twitter, didn't they? Your reputation ruined in 140 characters or less. Now, I think bad news spreads so quickly, companies act a lot quicker than they would have done before. And, I don't want to name any names, but there's high-profile sportsmen, actors. We're in a cancel culture, aren't we? And that's that fear of being cancelled. And if you're going to be cancelled, you don't want to be associated with anybody like that.
Yeah, it's much more widespread now, isn't it? That versus, as you say, pre-internet, where media channels were less. What's the word I'm looking for? Less pervasive, should we say?
I was also thinking. Sorry to take this on another slight tangent, Daniel and Sunil, but I was also thinking about that psyche part, and it's a real positive, but is it potential? It could be a negative as well, really. I watched an interview a couple of years ago with a football guy, and he was saying that their biggest rivals had suddenly decided to sponsor a pizza chain, and he loved these pizzas, but now he refuses to go there ever again. Now that's more conscious, and it seems a bit extreme to me, but I think we can. I don't think it. We sometimes think, at the very pinnacle of organizations that we've got someone that is completely balanced and level-headed. But I think they've still got that emotion about teams and people that they've grown up with. And if you choose the wrong one, they might say, well, hang on, I don't want to be thinking of that product because they're sponsoring the organization or team that I see subconsciously as the biggest rival. So I wonder if there's a risk as well as a bonus.
It's really interesting, John, because the question is, I would ask is it better to sponsor the team that finishes 19th and 20th in Formula One in the World Championship, right, than not to sponsor them at all? do you know what I mean? It's because you're still, even if you're the 19th and 20th car on the grid in Formula One, you are still at the absolute bleeding edge of motorsport, aren't you? But yet the very fact that you're at the back of that grid may well have a negative advertising or consequence, right, on potential buyers.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm no marketing strategist. I'm sure within these organizations they'll go through all the sort of risk profiling. But I've seen it several times. I think you see it more in football. Football tends to bring out some strange emotions in people. But I thought for this guy that him and his family went to this certain pizza chain every week and he refused to take them anymore. Possibly a bit extreme, but I wonder if there's that. That would be unconscious bias, of course, and I think that sort of. We're going more into the psychological. We'll get back on track in a moment, but that sort of thinking, because surely if we want to open those doors, I still think at essence, people sell to people. That's still an adage that's been around throughout history. But Formula One is about getting to those people, isn't it? Because they have that, we talked about that association.
No, absolutely. And then it's a very interesting point, right? If you're the CEO of a certain company and you categorically hate X brand of Formula One and the associations that come with it, does that necessarily mean that you're absolutely not going to look to pursue the service management solution that sponsors that brand for completely the wrong reasons in that case, right? Because it could be the perfect solution for that company's needs and outcomes. So it would be interesting to see some statistics on that, but I'm sure that they're not just simply not available, right? So
you're just never going to admit it, are you?
Yeah, exactly right.
If you're the CEO, owner of a company, you'd never come out with that.
We're not buying that because I don't like Aston Martin, so we're not having that solution or anything that's on their cars. I can't see it happening. No. Probably, yeah. But given the visibility of Formula One and kind of we've talked about it being a highly technologically involved sport. Who do you think that these marketing, the strategists you mentioned, when they sort of say, right, we want to sponsor this because we feel, and it's proven out in whatever, research they've done, they're going to hit this audience. Is it the C-suite? Is it middle managers? Is it all of the above? Where do you think that they're aiming that reach to? What's their target audience in your view, John?
I think that's another interesting point, and I was sort of thinking of this as we were sort of coming towards this podcast, and I think one of the mistakes we can make is thinking that this is purely targeted at that board level. Now, of course, you clearly, from a corporate side, you want your organization associated with winners, and you want to see your name on the front of the Formula One cars. You imagine how much marketing you drive. I know for some sponsorship, you'll be able to get short videos of their drivers talking about you, etc. So certainly that C-suite and above, there is definitely a target market there. And I think I'd maybe argue that's the primary one, because I don't think you sponsor a Formula One team, and I can't imagine how much it would cost, but certainly more than the three of us could afford, even if we put our pennies together. But I don't think you sponsor a Formula One team or engage with an Idris Elba, Simone Biles, if you're not targeting business growth. That's really what it's about. However, if you think about the beauty of Formula One, every level of an organization can resonate with a Formula One race. So you've got the corporate side, the corporate hospitality goes there, seeing your name, the marketing. But you've also got the finance side. You've got all the data analytics that resonates with those deep thinkers. It's the most agile organization in the world. So anybody with an agile DevOps view will find it very interesting what they do. That data science, as I mentioned, if you're a service desk, you're looking at that and thinking how we have to react at speed and get the right people. The organization, that sort of middle management, don't really like that term, but making quick decisions. So I think everywhere there, from the board down to the operations level, the shop floor, sees something in Formula One. And a great example of that, which I've literally just thought about, but I'd forgotten before, there was one of the surgeries, hospital surgery, got the Red Bull pit crew in to talk to them how they could be more efficient during surgery. And the simple thing that Red Bull said is color coordinate everything. And so everything has a color associated with it. Because if you think of speed, surely the pit crews, I mean, they are phenomenal.
It's the classic part, isn't it? You know, you see the video. Sorry to cut across you there just quickly, John, but you see the video. But back in the 80s, it took them 5 seconds, and then 85, they were doing it in 4.6. And there's been that progression now where you see it, and if you blink, you literally miss it because they're doing it in less than a second, right?
2 seconds.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, 2 seconds. I was think it's interesting when you talk about those levels. I remembered that team talking about how they got to a hospital and helped them in the efficiency of carrying out an operation. You think, I wouldn't have put those two together. So they're helping that very much that operational floor. Please excuse the pun, but the shop floor. So I think it's every level, but ultimately, the people spending the money are looking towards that business growth and additional revenue.
Could you imagine, John, if halfway through a race, the front left tire doesn't get changed because that tire specialist hasn't completed their onboarding process because the JML process in the service management system hasn't quite caught up with.
Exactly. There's someone there holding, in this case, a soft tire, and the other three are holding the hard tire.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm fairly sure it's probably happened, but very rare. They are a great example of teamwork. They are. I don't know, but I'd imagine you get nowhere near that frontline pit crew without having done that onboarding. So as you said, proving your worth, the ability, I think, to work under pressure.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? You've got one tire, you've got the gun, and their success of that race is dependent upon you. So And I think just to finish that, I was also thinking that there's a no better example of continual improvement than a Formula One race. They improve throughout the race. You've also got the risk management side that we see, whether they fuel the car for 67 laps in a 72 lap race, because they use data to predict whether there'll be a safety car. So if your car goes slower, uses less fuel, put less fuel in, it's going to go faster. So their ability to make decisions under pressure, I think, is something that certainly resonates with me in any world that I've been in support. So
there's so many analogies you can draw, right, from that. I mean, just the pit crew piece itself, but the wider aspects of this, all of the information that feeds into it. How can we make there's constraints around, as I understand it, I'm not an expert on Formula One, but there's constraints around things like the weight of the car has to be, there's a level it can't go below, and of course they could make it lighter and everything else, but there's certain standards they need to adhere to. Standards would probably be a great aspect to maybe explore further, but it really is seemingly endless. So maybe we've answered our own question here as to why, if you're serious about IT service management, this is exactly why you're sponsoring a Formula One team.
I think so. And you think of, sorry, Sunil, you think of the car itself. If we think of the car in our world, the fuel is probably the data. The driver is the business with that direction side. All the aerodynamics are the innovation world that we work within. We've got the engine, which we might say our policies and our process, our procedures driving the thing. The tires are all our relationship management and touch points. I could go on. And then we've got, as you said, Daniel, that pit crew. And we can align every part of a Formula One team probably to some part of service management. So I find it really exciting to think about. I'm sure when they're building these cars, they aren't building it with IT service management in mind. But when we look at it, I think it's why it resonates with us so much.
I mean, there's definitely an applicability in many ways to ITIL and ITIL processes, isn't there, in the way in which these high-performing teams and machines, businesses run. But I'm just going to play a bit of devil's advocate, if you don't mind, for a second. Are we really saying that, someone on the pit crew is logging a ticket on the, the employee center whilst the race is happening? I mean, is the service management technology really touching, race day, for example, do we think?
Well, think about what happens when a ticket is raised. There's an issue or a need. Someone evaluates that, triage as we would call it, and we decide who's the best person to do it following a set process. So we might decide this is a major incident. Oof, let's all come together. We might decide, actually, we know this goes to resolve a group X. Now, whilst we log everything on our ticketing systems, I think that the analogy is that the Formula One teams are doing the same thing. They're faced with a need. Sometimes you see them with just, I'm going to call it a screwdriver, I'm sure it isn't, where they just change the wing slightly to put a bit more downforce in. The driver himself has an amazing ability to change the setup of the car. So they're faced with a need, an issue. They triage it, albeit at lightning speed, and then they decide who needs to make the decision. Is it the pit wall and the strategist about whether you pit now, whether you stay out? You see it all the time, don't you? I saw it in last week's race about the decision about when you change tyres and if you do the wrong thing. So they're still doing what we're doing. I appreciate they're not sitting there and logging a ticket and give someone a reference number. But if you look at the fundamental steps of ticket management, what are we trying to do? We're trying to fulfill a request to make the customer more enabled, or we're trying to resolve an issue so they can carry on with their business process. That's what they do during a race.
I just the reason I'm sort of playing devil's advocate a little bit, John, is because, I mean, let's take an example. ServiceNow today is trying very hard to move into the front office. It has launched its CRM product. It is building industry go-to-market, strategies to tackle financial services or energy utilities, etc. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because they believe that if they capture the front office, which is a much bigger addressable market, then the back office will pull through. It makes a lot of strategic sense for an organization to have their front, middle, and back office on a single platform. The question I really have is, are we really saying that IT service management technologies are going to start to encroach into that front office, i.e. race day or race weekend? Or is there a separation? Is there really a point of proof that we can say McLaren is performing better because of their fresh service instance, or Williams are going faster because of their hookup with Atlassian, etc.? Or is it just the association that we're sort of,
Yeah, I get.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I get your point, and I think one of the sort of, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but one of the things we can think about is that the race is the be all and end all. So you could argue, well, what's the use of a ServiceNow ticketing system at a Formula One race? Well, probably at that point, not much. But that race is the 1% of everything that's happening before and during to enable you to be successful at that race. So I'm sure when we talk about Freshworks and we talk about ServiceNow, we talk about Halo and all of these, they are positioning themselves as business enablers.
Yeah.
So everything that happens in that lead up to the race is more efficient, more productive, more effective, more agile, if you like. So we, the visible bit of Formula One for us is the 2-hour race, and I know there's lots of other shows, but it's that weekend. But actually, all the work that we see and the beauty and the power of these enterprise service management tools, these business solutions, is enabling the business to get to the point where they can be successful in the race. So I think that's the reasoning, Sunil, but I still think that the actual association is powerful as well.
And by the way, I know I'm playing devil's advocate. I was playing devil's advocate there. But I think this comes actually to the heart of a broader question around IT service management and enterprise service management generally, which is it's not in the boardroom nearly enough, is it?
Correct.
Your point about business enablement is 100% correct. And in fact, you can't deliver that race day performance without the machine that operates underneath, also, performing in an optimum manner. So actually service management needs to be in the boardroom more generally. And I guess the association in Formula One is actually, well, look, it's getting closer to that, isn't it? It's becoming more apparent that the best teams have the best underpinning machine supporting that race day performance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, how can I put it without sounding too flippant? But I don't think these organizations are doing this sponsorship to win 10 license basic incident request ticketing deals. They want those sort of $1 million deals that are, and you get those from being a business solution as a mainstay, really. But there's also that what filters down. So if at some level you're selling 100 more 10 or 20 license deals because of what's filtered down, and that association, we say, well, happy days. Why wouldn't you do that? You've still got your bread and butter. But ultimately, if you're spending the level of money that I'm sure we're thinking of, and possibly the viewers are, that would take to your return on investment is going to be those multi-million-dollar deals. And they're typically, not always, they're typically linked to business solutions, not just IT service management ticketing systems.
I think it's a great point you make there about perhaps the smaller companies, because they're likely aspirational, I think. And one of the points we were going to ask about, John, and just to get a view on, was about the psychology involved in some of this. And I know we've talked a little bit about that earlier in this conversation, but it just made me remember something, and sort of still in the sort of sports vein. But typically, as a kid, at Wimbledon would come on, everybody who I knew in my age group would want to play tennis. Yeah, and there were a few free tennis courts around. But to play better tennis, you wanted to have the same racket as your idols on court. So because they play brilliant tennis, it must be, and the advertising would have you believe, I think at some level, well, they're not, Bjorn Borg isn't, I'm showing my age now, Bjorn Borg isn't playing brilliant tennis because he's a brilliant tennis player, but it's because he's got a brilliant racket. So perhaps there's an element of that. I don't know if you've got a view on kind of that psychological association piece beyond what we've already discussed. But as I say, as an aspirational organization, you think, well, we've got to have, the service management solution that's on this car because who knows why, right?
Yeah, I might need to line myself up for another podcast appearance here. I think you've opened up.
Yeah.
You've opened up.
It's a broad conversation.
Yeah, it really is. But I think you're actually spot on. I quite like what you're saying there, Daniel. But it's true, because in our life, when I used to play golf, I used to spend an inordinate amount on golf equipment, none of which that actually made me much better at golf. But I believed that having this equipment would make me better at golf. I should have been investing, of course, in education and training and coaching. But I think the point you make, there's that psychological. If I've got a top line tool product, I'm going to be better. And that's where we at the SDI say it's only one factor. And I know Accession would be the same, saying if you're not in the ability, you don't have the capability to leverage and drive that technology. If you don't have those problem statements, you don't have what you're actually trying to achieve with it. It's why people go back into the market every sort of 2 to 3, 4 years, isn't it? We see that, the three of us, I'm sure, see that. Photography is my hobby. And if someone, I'd say 7 times out of 10, if I show someone a photo that I'm quite proud of, they will say, wow, you must have a really good camera.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just smile to myself. But there's part of me says, I've also spent years understanding composition, light, and everything about it. But, that sounds really nerdy and horrible if you go down that route, and very arrogant. But it is a point. I had a friend say to me once, he said he worked for Gartner, and he used to say, the amount of people that want Gartner level 5 tools when they're not Gartner level 5 company. So how are you ever going to be able to leverage that investment, given that it's possible that you don't have the capabilities you might have in the long term? But I think Daniel, the answer is you've got to understand who you are, what your goals are, what are you trying to achieve, and then you match that to the right product. And it might be that the fact that they're, some of these are sponsoring Formula Ones, you may not want to be an organization that wins Formula One races. It doesn't mean that you're not extremely good at what you do and delivering business value. So I think you've got to understand what the need is and what you're trying to achieve. But it's a really good question, that one.
Yeah, it's not just the racket that makes you a phenomenal tennis player, right? Or the golf clubs that put you on the green in every shot. So,
well, I would argue, I think golf is a great analogy for this, actually, that it in fact, if you're not at the right level of maturity, actually, the tool set can even, have a more negative impact, I would suggest. I mean, my example of golf is I'm a 3 or 4 times a year golfer, right? I can go around in about 100, give or take, 5 either way, that sort of thing. But a couple of years ago, I had to borrow a set of clubs. I borrowed a set of clubs from somebody who is a scratch golfer. I couldn't hit the ball with these clubs. I mean, it was impossible because they were built for a scratch golfer and not for a 3 times a year golfer. And I think that's the same with service management tooling. You take a low maturity organization that isn't investing in training, education, in other words, going on a maturity journey, and you give them a ServiceNow instance, the likelihood is that the impact on their business is going to be negative, not positive, because of the costs associated with the platform, but the inability to harness all of that capability, right, will have a negative impact.
Yeah, it's a good point. And, we sometimes see organizations that seem to be spending more time trying to drive their ITSM tool than they are business outcomes that they bought the tool for in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a point, of course, where we've got to recognize that the opposite can happen. If I think of that golf analogy again, Sunil, and I don't play anymore, but there were points where I got to where actually the technology did help me. I got to the point where I was maybe driving the ball quite well, so I upgraded my driver, and because I was at a point where I could leverage it, it was making a difference, was giving me that extra 10 yards or whatever it might be. So it's not always one way. There are times, but you've got to ask yourself, am I in a place where I can get the return on value? I know it's return on investment, but the return on value as well for this technology.
Yes.
Because I think the point is, if you look at the ITSM tool market, all the tools fit some organization.
Yeah, very much so. John, fantastic conversation. And I know that we could potentially continue this on well into the 2 hours and beyond mark, because there's just so much to talk about here.
Longer than a Formula One race, in fact.
Well, yes.
We've run out of fuel. There's another final analogy for you.
But just to keep the analogy going, I think we should do a pit stop here. And thank you very much. But I think we could probably revisit this in future, John. I think there's certainly a lot more to discuss here, aside from golf, tennis, Formula One, but all things service management, of course. Fantastic to have you with us today.
My pleasure.
To all our listeners, I'm going to leave you with a quote that somebody told me, because we were talking about marketing, but I heard this a little while back, that only 2% of marketing is effective. The problem being that no one knows which 2%. I can't attribute that to anybody because I don't know who is the owner. Would love to hear your views on that. Leave a comment, get in touch if you'd like to take part, or perhaps have a podcast topic you'd like to hear us discuss. Sal, any closing words from yourself?
No, just a thanks to you, John. It's been fantastic. Really, really appreciated your insights and a very good conversation today.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure to be a part of it. Great conversation, really good topic, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay. Thanks again, John. And to all our listeners, see you next time.